All right. We are continuing our look at the Old Testament, continuing our look in the book of Genesis, uh, and we'll pick up continuing to look at Jacob in this story now as we've where we've gotten to is about 2,250 years from Adam. And so we've covered a lot of time, and this story still has another 100 or so years to span before it's over. In Genesis 33, we see Jacob reconciling with Esau, and right after that, we see an incident. I I'm I'm so tempted to go deeply into this incident because it's interesting. Um, and so I'm going to encourage you to read it at your leisure, and we'll take a look at it in the future. But Dinah and Shechem and the uh, the consequences of those actions on each part, how things escalate. Uh, Obviously, it's not good. We see Jacob reprove them for their actions, and I decided at some point when we have time, I'm going to use this as a single class lesson, probably on a Wednesday night, so that we could discuss some of these matters. One of the things that I find interesting about the story, so again, on your at your own leisure, just take a look at Genesis 34. And one of the things I find interesting is this question: what should everyone have done? um, it's a difficult question for me to answer. I'd be interested in this as a discussion topic to see what your thoughts would be, how people should have behaved in this, because it's quite understandable that things escalate. So that'll happen down the road at some point. I'll try to announce it before we do that class. God sends Jacob back to Bethel, renewed promises. Now, I do want to take a look at this because, again, it's part of the overall narrative that I've been trying to demonstrate in this particular portion of the class. And God appeared unto Jacob again when he came out of Padanaram and blessed him. And God said unto him, Thy name is Jacob. Thy name shall not be called any more Jacob, but Israel shall be thy name. And he called his name Israel. And God said unto him, I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall be of thee, and kings shall come out of thy loins. And the land which I gave Abraham and Isaac, to thee I will give it, and to thy seed after thee will I give the land. So what do we see happening here? Yes.
God reaffirming his promise to the next generation. And an interesting thing that I've talked to you about, why does God change people's names?
Yes.
And someday I'd like to look at that, but basically it seems that back then, your name just wasn't your name, it actually meant something.
Yes. And not long ago that was still true. So, Brother Tharp had suggested a particular topic to look at, and that is name changes in the Bible, and that will indeed be coming. It is truly an interesting topic. I've never dealt with it before, so I'm finding that one fascinating. Yes.
Last names were your trade or profession or your status.
Yes.
For many, many years.
Yes, I do come from an ancestry that did hawking, that actually hunted with hawks, and that the name evolved over time. Um, we know people were named Cook and things of that nature, and it makes sense. We just in looking at that, you know what? I'll leave that for another time. Like I said, it's interesting, and you guys know that you can get me with interesting topics. So yes, we will take a look specifically at that. But he reaffirms the promise is the main thing I want to focus on here again, because we're seeing this promise, promise, promise. Is it a new promise each time that he's making?
Assuring them that the promise is still the promise to the generations to follow.
That is an important element that we need to understand here, because there's an argument that people make that everything's been changing over time. God put Adam and Eve in the garden, and that didn't work, and so he came up with a new system, and that didn't work, and so he came up with the Old Testament covenant, and that didn't work, so he came up with a New Testament. Why do people like to believe this?
They don't study.
They don't study. But that's true. That's why people believe it. But people want to believe this. Have you ever considered why? Look, if you believe this, you can believe something else is coming.
Mm.
Whenever you don't like what you have, what is it that you start to do?
Want change.
You want something better, you want something else, right? This isn't cutting it for me. So I don't want Jesus Christ. I don't want that way. I don't like that way. And so therefore, I'm going to wait for something else. And I have a basis to wait for something. That's the thinking. Just so we're clear, I'm not saying that's true. That's the thinking that people have. This is why understanding that this promise and seeing this promise, it shows us how God works. It shows us, it gives us a glimpse. Now, we're not going to understand the mind of God fully, the level that God can think on. He makes it clear. We can't think on that level, but we can understand portions because God is consistent. And so what we're seeing here is a consistent pattern. He said it. He reaffirmed it. He reaffirmed it. We saw it with Abraham. We saw him constantly reaffirming it. Reaffirms it with Isaac. Reaffirms it with Jacob. We've spanned generations now, and it's the same promise. Brother Tharp.
When we read it, it doesn't seem like that much time, and to God, it's not no time at all. But this is a whole lifetime of these men, and it's also showing us that God had a relationship with each of them.
Indeed.
So we think of no history written at this time, so it's all oral, and it's like, oh yeah, God apparently promised something to my grandfather. It carries less weight than their current relationship with God.
Yes. So I was just looking at the dates, 190 years from the promise made to Abraham. Again, some of these are approximate dates. There are certain things we can pinpoint exactly, and some things you can approximate because they happen between this and this. So about 190 years, almost 200 years. How many generations is that?
Current generations, it's 10.
12?
Instant, yeah. A generation in the Bible is 20 years, right? The Israel, spoiler alert for our later class, Israel wanders in the wilderness 40 years, 2 generations. So if we use the Bible's measurement, that's 10 generations, right? It's a long time. Who was your ancestor 10 generations ago? What was their name? It's a long time, right? So, good point. Again, where when we factor in the time, we can understand why there's going to be a need for this, especially if it's something like a promise. Now, if I make Brother Tharp a promise, I'm not expecting his daughter's grandchildren to come to me looking for the promise. They probably wouldn't find me. That much time, only with God can you span that many generations. This is an aspect of understanding God. Do you think, and I'm asking for an opinion here, do you think this is one of the points of all of this as a teaching tool?
I think so.
Oh, the time?
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't believe anything is by accident. I think it has meaning. And again, when we talk about how we are today, and we ask that question, well, it's been 2,000 years, we get hung up on that. And then when we look at this, if we look at it in light of the time being covered, it should shed a little bit perspective for us. Yes.
Yeah, I was thinking that we hear in the New Testament and later in the Old Testament how unchanging, how stable God is. Well, what do they base that on? Well, they base it on He makes promises that go for generations and generations. And this is that proof.
Yes, indeed. So this is all significant, all important. So He makes this promise. He continues to reaffirm the promise, the same promise. And of course, the promise was that in Abraham's seed, right? And so Isaac, and He reaffirms it's through Isaac, not through Ishmael. He made that clear as well, not just Abraham's seed, but the seed of promise, right? Then He reaffirms it with that seed, with Isaac, and He reaffirms it with Jacob. And so there should be no doubt. This also is setting up something. We haven't finished this, but it's setting up something. What is it that it's setting up? What's going to come next after Genesis?
Are you talking about the whole Egypt, the taking it from a family to a whole nation?
Yeah, it's setting up that. We're going to have to remember these elements. The fact that God is reaffirming and passing it down from generation to generation. Because when we get there, they're going to know some things. And sometimes we read Exodus like they didn't know what was going on. So God is very clear. He's very specific about them. Not only did He make the promise that through His seed, all nations will be blessed. What else did He say to Abraham? 400 years. Something's going to happen. Right? So we've got to keep that in mind. That was part of it. So if they know this and this is being passed on, that's something that I want us to keep in mind when we get to Exodus. Because a lot of times, again, we read Exodus without this backstory. Yes.
Because we don't read about it, we assume that all of a sudden God's not dealing with anybody anymore. And one, I doubt that's the case. And we see it with God dealing with Moses' parents. So I don't think He just disappeared for all those years. So I think that His nation knows Him. So like you said, when they come out, doesn't make them obedient, obviously, but...
Right. Right, but it informs our reading when we remember and we see a pattern with God. And yes, there's a bunch of time because God doesn't specify much of anything in the passage of time we're going to see. However, now we see a consistent pattern that's gone on. Why would we believe anything else has happened? Now, I don't know how frequently, how He interacted or what, but we will see indications that people knew. And this is how they would know. This is how each generation it's passed on. We know Israel has a heavy history of oral history being passed down. Yes.
I mean, later in the Bible, we see how every other or every third generation they fall away from God. So how in the world would they live in Egypt for hundreds and hundreds of years, which would be 15, 20 generations, and not completely fall away from God if he was not involved in their lives?
That's a good question. That's a good question. So let's take this with us. Again, this is a story that's being told. A story, not just a compilation of stories put in the book of Genesis. You know, read it as one coherent thing, bringing us to a particular point. Let's see. So that brings us to Joseph. Genesis 37. Yeah, Genesis 37, verse 5. And we know Joseph's dreams and about him being sold into Egypt. Now, this seems very, very harsh for someone to suffer this. Also, God's plan can come to fruition. But I've said this before, this is not God being evil to people. The Bible definitely covers the fact that, look, we may go through some things for some time. All for the greater end. It outweighs it. That's something that we also have to keep in mind when we read stories like this. Of course, Joseph puts it all in perspective at the end. Judah and Tamar. I'm going to keep going through these. Obviously, we can't go through the details, but I want us to just see the story. Joseph resisting temptation and imprisoned. Again, another temptation for me to just delve into this story. How, trouble really can attack us, can find us. Joseph just doing his job. And having someone else be about no good, bringing a lot of problems into his life. But it was all intended for a purpose. Joseph's dreams in prison. We're spanning a lot of time here as we go through. Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dream and is exalted. Now, Joseph is in prison. And when he's remembered that, oh yeah, there's someone there who can interpret dreams, some time passed even there. So there's time that's really going by. And so he's only released because Pharaoh's disturbed, right? And now it's time for him to be called back into action. And wouldn't you know it, the famine begins. Joseph stores up grain. Now this, of course, is all going to work to bring everybody together. The brothers' journey and their second journey with Benjamin brought the cup test, and Joseph finally revealing himself in Genesis 45. So all of this time now, Joseph has a particular point of relative prominence, right? He has some authority, some power at this point. And what would be the natural inclination if someone did you wrong and you suddenly rose to power over them? That would be the natural person, the human response, right? I mean, obviously we're asked to live by the spirit and not by the flesh. But the fleshly response, the carnal response, would be, okay, now the tables have turned. And we don't see that spirit in Joseph. Yes.
Joseph is a type of Christ, and he's exhibiting love like Christ does for us. So we can understand why, but you're right, most people would abuse their authority.
But Joseph almost seems to have a little fun with him along the way, does he not?
A little.
Almost like a brotherly type of mischief along the way. But again, all teaching tools. None of this is by chance. And you're right, he is demonstrating, obviously, a type of Christ in this, in their deliverance. But I still find it impressive, just amazing as a story that how do you overcome those baser instincts where you'd want to retaliate and get back at someone? Yes.
Well, you can tell because of his gift of interpreting dreams that he's got a relationship with God.
Right.
And that obviously colored his way of dealing with people. And left on his own, he probably wouldn't have done this.
Yeah. Probably very true. Sister Buttrey?
And say if we study, we get closer to God. And having God in your presence at all times, you stop and think before slow to speech. I always remember that, slow to speech, slow to anger. Because
Right.
if we don't, we haven't bridled our tongue.
Right. It's not an easy thing to do. I mean, you're saying it, and it's true.
But
And that doesn't
the minute
mean
it
we're
slips out,
minimizing.
you know.
What was that?
And the minute something slips out, you know,
Mhm.
and you need to ask forgiveness.
And
because
prayerfully over time we get stronger and strengthened and practiced in that, being slow to speech. It's not always an easy thing. It really isn't. So, very interesting. Let's see. So Jacob goes to Egypt, and God reassuring him. Israel settles in Goshen. Jacob blesses Ephraim and Manasseh. Jacob blesses the 12 sons, and Jacob dies and is buried in Canaan. So we get the close of Jacob's story, but it's not the end of the story, right? His purpose is done. He doesn't see the fulfillment of the whole promise. He can't. It's through your seed. He's not going to see it, but he sees it in action, right? Can you imagine that there would be a level of comfort for him in seeing and knowing this plan that's going on in the midst of this famine, in the midst of starvation among of people? I'd imagine he'd feel like, okay, everything's happening as it should. We're preserved. We're taken care of. Yes.
Yeah, I was going to say, you almost said part of what I said, that in this world of all the trials he's seen his family put through, when he dies, he sees all of his kids in a situation where he knows that they're going to survive. Not just God's promise, but he's seeing them thriving at this point.
Yes.
He's probably not going to see them go into slavery yet. So when he dies, it's like, oh, God's promise is coming true. You know?
However, he already knows, right? He knows this is going to happen. You're going to serve in a foreign land. They're going to entreat you bitterly. That's already known. That's foreknowledge. So if everything else is coming about, then that hardship is coming about. But since the story doesn't end there, you can rest assured. Now, you have children. They're going to go through hard times. You know this. What you really want to know is that they're going to come out okay. They're going to come out of those different struggles all right. It's not, oh, I don't want them to suffer. Well, we don't want them to suffer anything, but we know they're going to, right? If we're rational about it, we know they're going to struggle, and we know it's going to be for their own good. How do we know that? Life. We've lived. The Bible tells us. Yeah. You can't keep them from the things they're going to suffer. You can help them, try to minimize it, try to comfort them, try to give them reassurances, but you can't stop it. Yes.
When you see people who don't ever suffer, they're very rich or something, their kids are always messed up. It's the trials in life that prove us. It's just like the Bible says. These things prove us and make us better people.
Yeah, and even those people that you say, we say they don't go through anything. They do. Sometimes they're not even aware that they're going through it. They're missing the struggle that they're going through. They're failing at it utterly, and they have no idea. But we all go through things. It's how we handle them that matter. Genesis 50, verse 20. Obviously, one of the best known passages in the Bible. But as for you, ye thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good, to bring to pass, as it is this day, to save much people alive. This passage often is quoted, often is talked about. Why is it so important? Yes.
Well, it's what helps us sometimes get through things. And in my own life, I've gone through things, and I've said this many times before, when it's all done, I wouldn't be in the good place I am if I hadn't gone through that. So you need to know that and know that there is a light at the end of the tunnel.
Indeed. The word up there, providence. How do you know God's providence?
Well, God's will doesn't get changed, so if it happened, it's what God wanted to happen.
See, we know, though, of God's providence through stories like this. Mm-hmm. And it's an epic story. See, that's providence. Providence isn't me manipulating something for a couple of days to get the end that I want. Generations have passed. And that's just dealing with the promise to Abraham. Some 200 years pass, and we see this come to pass. Beyond that, we take all of this, take that view, and zoom out to the bigger picture. It's all about who? This is all a story of Jesus. So now we're going back to the beginning. We've spanned 2,000 years, and we know we're still not at the end of that story. We're going to go on, and God's providence. This is a smaller section that demonstrates to you the idea of God's providence. You can't understand it without help. This story, this particular story helps us to understand it because Joseph sums it up. In many stories, we look at it, we can infer based on what we're seeing. We can see God's plan coming to be, the steps of God's plan coming through. But this one, he calls it out. He said, look, this was all intended. From the time you did this, this was the intended purpose by God. It wasn't your intended purpose. So we can see God even utilizing evil thoughts, evil actions, evil decisions. It doesn't mean he sanctions them, doesn't make them right. It means that even in that, God's will be done. Now, what does that tell us today?
Will be done.
Yes. There's something I keep
Promise will always be there for us.
there's something I keep saying as a reminder, not only for this any congregation I speak at. I try to tell people this. God is alive. We serve a living God, not a dead God. People sometimes wonder why the emphasis on that. It's because we act kind of like these are just stories in the past. We are very, what have you done for me lately type of people and mindset. And we don't see God moving in these ways. But moment by moment, how much do people see? Again, this is 200 years. How much did they see moment by moment? So just because we don't see all of the movements of God, just even during our lifespan, doesn't mean he's not active. It doesn't mean his providence is still not a thing, which means he's in control. Actively, not passively. It's not just, well, everything now will come out the way it's going to come out. If God intended something then, and he intends something now, he has the ability to make that come about. Yes.
And realizing that, we're more able to see God's providence in our own lives.
Yeah. And in our lives, in our small lives relative to the span of time we've looked at so far, we can understand these are going to be minor movements in a much bigger picture. So these 2,000 years since Christ, God has continued to move in our lifespan. Almost as I am almost getting to 60, God has continued to move. Can I see it all? No. But I can look back, and I believe I can identify things where it just doesn't feel like coincidence. And I imagine each one of you could do that in your own lives, where you can say, this seemed to bring me to a particular place. Maybe something where you've been able to help somebody. You've gone through something and you can help somebody deal with something similar. You're uniquely in a position to do that because of the things you've experienced. Could that be an element of providence? Indeed. Joseph dies in faith, looking to the promised land. That closes out Genesis with the entire story there being something to bring us to Egypt. That's what this story is about. Man, it's not a story of the garden, a story of the fall, a story of salvation, a story of a promise, a story of Joseph, it's not that. It's one story bringing us to that law that's going to serve so importantly for bringing us to the Christ. Brother Tharp.
Last year you did the New Testament in a year, and then you wanted to do the Old Testament in a year, but if you really look at it, time is split into three. Before Moses, from Moses to the Christ, and from Christ to the end of Revelations. So you could have gone ahead and spent a whole year on Genesis.
Absolutely, and one day we might, because going into, you see, I talked about the elements of the story, but we couldn't, there's no way, even, some of the courses are the Old Testament in 3 years, And you're still not going to delve into all of those stories if you do that. So I'm trying to discipline myself to go through it like this so that we're seeing that bigger picture. But Genesis is a worthwhile study in and of itself. It just covers so much time. Now, some of the later books are just as big, but they're easier to cover in a shortened span of time because they're focused in their stories. But Genesis is spanning so much time, it's very hard. All we could do is touch on them. I've got a lot of sermon material for the next year, because as I keep going through this, I really want to talk about this. Okay, deal with this in a sermon. Okay, I really want to talk about this one. Deal with it in a sermon. So that's kind of how I'm handling this. And Genesis, there's just so much there. All right, let's see. Well, the discussion questions were the ones that are in the handout. So just take a look at that. If we want to pick up, if you have any questions next week, we can pick up with that. Otherwise, we'll go on into the book of Exodus. Brother Tharp.
You mentioned, I was just going to ask about the handouts. We haven't had one in a while because it's all been in Genesis. Are you going to start putting more out again then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Indeed. Prayerfully, God willing, Wednesday we'll have the handouts here. All right. Thank you for your attention, your participation, and after a break, we'll go into